On this episode of Live, Build, Change, I have a live coaching session for you with a friend of mine named Carey. Well, it's not live, it's recorded, but it was live when we did it. So stay tuned. Live your faith, build your business, and change your world. This is Live, Build, Change. Well, I've been waiting for the opportunity to do an episode like this because I am chatting with somebody who wants to do the exact thing that I've been talking about, which is build a business that will enable them to change their world. And the person I'm talking with today is an old friend of mine from college. His name is Carey. Carey, how you doing today?
Hello, Carey. I'm doing very well. How are you?
I am doing great, man. It's good to hear your voice. Carey reached out to me after he had heard me on another podcast being interviewed, and he said that his story is a little different than mine, but he kind of wants to accomplish the same thing that I'm talking about, building a business that could change the world through supporting some other causes. So, Carey, why don't you tell us a little bit about what it is you have in mind for your future and how a business might figure into that?
Yeah, well, so we've set some goals as a family and also personally. You know how you do your typical New Year's resolution type things. And we do that annually as a family where we sit down and we talk about things that we want to accomplish or see done in that year. And so this year, when we were sitting there and going through, we kind of read the ones that we've written down, each take our turn. And there was some of the usual things like work out more, spend more time in the Word, different things like that. And then when we got all done, I said, okay, now I want everybody to write one down that you would really like to see accomplished, but it would be really an act of God for that to happen. People had different things that they had written down. And so one of the things I wrote down was I would like to be able to be in a position where we can just give half of our income away. And there's a couple organizations, one in particular that we've been linked with for a number of years. It's called Love Store. It's a mission organization that works out of Zambia, Africa. And I've been able to travel there once. My oldest daughter's been there 3 times. One time she went for 2 or 3 months working there. And then my oldest son has been a couple times. And the missionaries who are there, they have a couple of children's homes. They've started from scratch, started to work there a few years back, and now they have a couple of children's homes, what we call it the bush, probably a good hour from the nearest town. And they have, I think they have probably 60 children now that they work with. And my daughter and son-in-law have helped them start a child sponsorship program. And so we would really like to be more involved with that organization, with our time and our finances. And so that's another thing is it would be great to develop something where we would have the freedom to be able to go both on short terms and possibly even more of a long term, a year or more, where we could go to Zambia and work there. And then there's another organization, or 2 more, that battle against human trafficking and the sex trade. One is called Compassion First. They're based out of Oregon. Another one's called Destiny Rescue, and I think they're based out of Australia. That's another area where we have a heart, and we'd like to see to be able to have do some things there to help those organizations. So that, in a nutshell, what we'd like to see happen. Now, how to make that happen is a whole other ball game, which is why I called you to see if you had some ideas and things we can kind of throw back and throw one at the wall and see what sticks.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me summarize real quick. So you've got both causes that you want to support, the ones that you mentioned, and you've got this desire to actually be on site, in country at some of those locations, trying to be involved in the work and have yourself supported while you're doing that. Well, I totally think that that's right up the alley of what I want to encourage people to do and help people to do. Part of my theory about my own experience online is that anybody who has a life experience of any length has something that they can create that can generate that kind of income. I don't know if you've heard about the study methods course that I've created. It just has passive income coming in all the time, and it's all based on this test I had to take to become a mortgage loan officer. And it brings in a significant amount of revenue every month. I'm convinced you probably have something in your background that could be leveraged to do something along that same line. So let's take a look at your life experience and the things you've done over the last, 20 years, 25 years since we've known each other. I don't know the whole story. So why don't you tell us about some of the things you've done professionally and as hobbies that in your mind, maybe there are something you could create from those experiences, like an online course or some kind of a resource that other people might actually pay to receive?
Yeah, so as far as my background goes, I had a landscaping company that I had in Colorado for a number of years, and I did that for about 5 years, and then sold that, and then went and did some property management for homeowners associations. So you're working with actual homeowners. You're dealing with the board who kind of runs the homeowners associations. Did that for a year in Denver, and then we ended up moving to Oregon. And when we came to Oregon, I worked for, about 6 years as a general manager for considered a lumber remanufacturer. We were kind of a small lumber mill that would produce truss components for roof truss companies up and down the West Coast. And then in 2007, 2008, when the recession hit, our phones basically stopped ringing. Builders weren't building, and so we could see the writing on the wall. So I did the obvious thing and got my real estate license as the real estate market was falling off a cliff, and which was a crazy thing to do. But I did it for two reasons. One is, at the time when I left the mill, I started doing some photography for realtors. I had a system I called Tower Cam, where I had a camera that was on a mast that would go 40 feet in the air and take aerial photos. It was pre-drone years, and so I had a lot of business with realtors doing real estate photography. And through that, I got talked into basically getting my real estate license in 2008, which I really have no regrets. I still have my real estate license. I'm still a realtor. So I did real estate and photography for about 3 years, and it was really up and down. Real estate's all commission-based. And so in 2011, the owner of the real estate firm that I'm with asked me to help develop a property management. Actually, they just started a property management company. They asked me to come on board and kind of help grow that. And so I really didn't want to get back into property management. If you've ever done property management, you know that it's a lot of headaches. It's why property managers exist, because owners don't want to deal with the headaches. And so I gave them a commitment of 1 year, and that was 5.5 years ago, and I'm still doing it. But I am shifting away from it. And so we were able to grow the company from, we had about 50 properties. Now we have, got up to, I think, 260 properties that we managed. So that's kind of my career background over the last 25 years.
Okay, and as you think through those things, everything from the landscaping to the property management and construction company and all of those kinds of things, what do you see in any of those areas where there is a very clear and definite need within that market or niche, where you might have something that you could have insight or expertise that you could package in a way that would solve the needs that you see in the market?
The one thing that came to my mind, and this actually was something that came to my mind after I contacted you, but I started thinking about, I guess when we were in Colorado visiting, and we were actually at your place last summer, and you were telling me about what you did with the online course, the mortgage broker course. So I was thinking, in some ways, it's almost like you stumbled onto it. So if you stumbled onto something that was that successful, how many other things are there out there that, if you really thought about it, could you put together that would sell online? So one of the things I started looking at as I'm getting back into doing more real estate and getting away from property management, the tower cam system that I had with the camera that sat on the big pole that telescoped 40 feet in the air, those days are gone because of the age of drones. Now, that being said, there's regulations now. The FAA controls unmanned aircraft, and you can have drones that you fly for hobby or recreation, and anybody can do that. If you charge for any kind of services with a drone, you then have to have a certification. It's called a UAS certification. And so I've looked into that. I was really surprised at how difficult that test is. It's almost like you have to be a pilot in order to pass the test. So I started thinking maybe that's something that I could go through that process, do something similar like what you did with the mortgage broker test, possibly help other people achieve the UAS certification. I've just done some initial checking on that. So that's just kind of one of the ideas that has come up, just kind of thinking things through a little bit as some possibilities.
Well, that's remarkably similar to what I found. Stepping into that arena, the test was just incredibly hard and the process was convoluted and difficult. And that's why I saw the need, is because I felt the need. And I knew that people needed some kind of help in that. So as you've looked into what it takes to get certified in that way, what are the hurdles that there are in that path that a person wanting that certification would have to overcome?
Well, again, I've only kind of initially looked at it. When I go online, first of all, I called our local airport because they do the certification. You can do the testing here at our local airport. It's almost like a mom and pop kind of an airport. There's no tower, nothing like that. We live in a town of about 30,000. But there's a helicopter company that does, you can get a helicopter's license, and they do some tours and things like that. And they do the testing. So the test itself is $150. If you don't pass, you wait 14 days, you can take it again. But then when I talked to the lady there, she said, then we have our helicopter trainer who can also, for a price, and she didn't know what that price was yet, do the, I forget I think it was ground test or something like that. And basically kind of work you through the process of being able to pass the test. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll just go online, see what's on there, and go the cheap route. Well, I pulled up sample questions to the test, and it's just like reading Greek. It was amazing. So I started looking at what was available for tutorials and whatnot. And the only one that I found that seemed like it would be something that I would invest in was about $300. And one of the biggest downsides is just the cost. You really have to know that you want to go into this and make some money at it. If you have the cost of the drone, you want to have not just your Walmart type drone. You have to have something of quality, so you have some cost there. You have the cost of the test, you have the cost in training. My thought was just, if there's a way to put the information together that would really help someone be able to pass the test and not cost them $300, there could be a real market for that.
That totally makes sense. So if I'm understanding you right, there's an actual written test that a person has to pass, and that requires that they have some specialized knowledge of, I'm assuming, terms and logistical issues and things like that that are contained in the test.
Yes.
Do you have any way of finding out what that content is that you've got to study? I mean, for example, in the course that I had to take, there was a government mandated 20-hour course as well, and it had a lot of content that you had to learn from that course, and you had to study it, but it didn't help you much with the how to study part. And so I don't know if your situation is similar in that regard, or if you would have to kind of create the actual, for lack of a better term, 20-hour course that teaches the person all the content. Do you know enough about it to know?
No, I don't. My guess would be, so there's a lot of sample questions out there that are going to be similar to what's on the test. And then from what I've read, there's a few questions in there that are kind of like, that was never in any of the study material. So, but that being said, it's one of those 60 questions. You have 2 hours to pass it, and you have to get a 70%. So, that being said, it just, from what I've seen, it looks like there would be a way to gather that information. It's more about a cost-effective way to learn the material that is going to make sense to people, because a lot of it, when I looked at it, you're looking at maps that are aeronautical maps that are just full of lines and colors and symbols, and and you have no idea what any of it means. So to put something together and package it in a way where the sample questions, and there's a lot of them, they make sense to people. You start talking about, just latitude and longitude and different levels of airports, what altitudes you can fly depending on those airports. And there's apps you can get so you know that if you're going to fly a drone, how close you are to certain airports. Can you even fly there? How high can you fly? And those are the easy ones. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, it does to a degree. It sounds like this is fairly new. How recent is this regulation?
August 2016, I believe.
Wow. Okay. So they're still trying to figure it out for themselves, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Like the government does a lot of times, they'll put a regulation in place and then don't have any clear system to help you figure out how to comply with the regulation. So is this something that you feel like you would be really interested in learning yourself so that you could create a course?
I'll probably do it anyway because I enjoy doing that and because I have a huge network of realtors that I deal with. So I'm not too concerned about the fact of being able to make my investment back. And I just enjoy doing it. It's fun to do. So yeah, I'll be doing it either way.
Okay. So let me just brainstorm with you some of the potential hurdles that I see from a business perspective or marketing perspective. And you can, throw it back at me with responses if you feel like you know enough about how to answer. And I'm curious how much demand there is for this course. So in other words, how many people are really seeking to get into this kind of certification or will be seeking to get it in the future? There may not be a way to know those numbers right off the bat, but some Google searching and some searching YouTube and things like that might give you some ideas of how many people are actually trying to address this issue. Because, a lot of people think, well, if there's nobody providing this service yet, that's great. I can be the first one. Sometimes that's true. But a lot of times, the fact that there is competition in the market already tells you that there is definitely a need because they've recognized the need and they've stepped in. And the fact that they're making money from it tells you that there's people willing to pay for it, if that makes sense. So if you can find people like the $300 thing you were talking about, people that are doing it, that's an indication that there definitely might be some need. So I would encourage you to find ways to research that need. You may not know exact numbers, but are there a significant number of people who seem to be searching for how to get certified in this way? And if so, how many? And is it enough that you could see it growing over time as the regulation takes on a life of its own? One way that I'm thinking of that you could do that is that Google has a free tool within their Google AdWords, and it's called Keyword Planner. And you can go into there and put in keywords and keyword phrases that have to do with the topic that you're searching for. And it will bring back to you numbers of people who are searching for those phrases. And it'll also give you listings of other keywords that are related that people are searching for, because you may not think of all of them, but it may show you some ideas that you didn't think of, but do pertain to your topic. So that's one way you could kind of get an idea of what people are searching for if you use that tool. Some other things that I can see is that as the regulation kind of morphs and grows and the process for getting certified becomes more tangible, your course is going to have to morph at the same time that the regulation morphs. You're going to have to keep up with the regulations. You're going to have to update your course periodically. So you'd want to either know that that's part of the cost of doing business and that you're going to have to do those things in order to maintain your course as a relevant course for future students. And then also, you're going to have to think through the way you build the course so that it can be easily edited. For example, videos sometimes are not the easiest thing to edit, especially in the way that you put them together. But there are ways you can put it together where, you can just chop out one section and replace it with another when things change.
Right.
So that kind of thing you need to keep in mind. And the only reason I think of those things is because of where you're wanting to go. You want to have this be a fairly passive, fairly recurring income sort of thing so that you can be busy doing things that matter more to you. And that'll be something that I think you need to think through in the way you design the course. Any response to any of those things? What are your thoughts?
I think those are great questions to ask. As far as how much demand, I haven't done a lot of research on that. The only thing I've heard, I think that in the U.S. there was 1 million drones sold at Christmas time alone. It's just become a big thing. Now, most of those, obviously, are going to be folks who are just wanting to do it for hobby and recreation. But there's also, I get calls from different people all the time that are, asking me about, what do I think about them using their drone for taking real estate pictures. And I said, it's great, but you have to realize that you do have to have the certification to make money at it. Oh, I do? Yeah, you can check it out yourself. But so I think there's a need. How big it is, I don't know. So, your recommendation on the keyword planner, I'll definitely follow up on that. And then as far as, the course and it evolving and kind of changing as the regulations do, I totally agree. I mean, we're talking the government and things are going to definitely change up. So I think that's a great bit of advice to put something together that could be easily edited. It's just going to make things easier in the future moving forward.
That's advice that comes from hard-learned experience. The course that I created, obviously, is also governed by government regulations, and it came into effect in 2010, has changed a couple of times in some fairly minor ways since then. I didn't create my course until 2013, so I had a 3-year window of the government playing around and changing it a lot. That was prior to me having to step on the scene. So since I've had my course in place, I've only had to adjust things twice, and they were fairly minor things. Now, with Donald Trump being in office now, he is promising to address some of the regulations that affect my course. He says in productive ways. I don't know exactly what his changes will be, but that's on the horizon, and it's something I may have to adjust again. So all that just to say, you need to think through when the government's involved and laws are involved, there's going to be changes that you don't know how often, and you need to be ready to address those things. Let's think a little bit on the marketing side of things. It's great to build something, but it's not like Field of Dreams where you can't build it and they will come. You've got to get it out there so people know about it. So help me think through the marketing. Who do you think would be interested in a course like this that you know of from your experience in real estate?
I think photographers, for one. There's a lot of people that do photography, and I know a lot of them that have gotten drones, and a lot of them are doing it just for fun. But if they want to make money at it, they have to have the certification. So photographers, I think, is kind of an obvious one. Beyond that, your guess is as good as mine. I really don't know at this point who the target market would be. Something yet to be determined.
I appreciate your honest answer. I would assume there's realtors like yourself who'd want to get certified just so they could, get the license themselves and take their own photos for their properties. A way that you could kind of research that, I think, is probably to go on Facebook and search for groups that are having to do with drones and, drone piloting and things like that, and start getting into those groups and listen to what's going on in those groups so that you can see the things that people are talking about surrounding this particular topic. If you get into those groups and just introduce yourself, engage in conversation, what I've discovered about the online world, especially the social media part of it, is, believe it or not, it's supposed to be social. And so the more that you're in there building relationships and talking with people, the more people begin to know you, like you, and trust you. And when you finally do have a product that's related to them or that they might be interested in, they're much more likely to buy and much more likely to trust that it's good, right? Because they know you. I think you should get into groups like that yesterday, as soon as you can. Just find those groups, start interacting with people. There may be some on LinkedIn. I don't know, maybe on Google+, although Google+ is kind of winding down, it seems. But you can find those groups and you can get involved and start listening, because you'll hear people talk about their actual pain points around this issue and start taking notes. What are the pain points they're addressing? What are the things that they say that they need? How could you create that in a product or a course? And it may give you an entirely different idea that aren't geared around the certification and maybe get around something else. So you really need to do that, to listen to the market. And I think you'll find out what you need to know real easily when you do that.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. I'll definitely do that. One of the things I was going to ask you real quick is the mortgage broker test is that what it is, basically?
It's a test you have to take to become licensed. You had to take a real estate test, right, to become licensed? Right. It's the same sort of thing.
The real estate test that I took was an Oregon test. I have an Oregon license. Is the mortgage broker test, it sounds like you're marketing, what you're selling, your service on a national level, to every state. Is it because it's federal government that oversees that, the mortgage broker, the mortgage industry, so your target market is more of a national market as opposed to, like here, you have like your contractor board, it's going to be a state thing. The real estate's pretty much a state thing. Is the mortgage industry, is it the federal government that oversees that?
It is both. There is a federal test that you have to take, which is 100 questions. And then most states are actually opting in to have their state-specific things included in that same test, which increases it to 120 questions. There are some states who have said, no, we're not going to do the federal thing, and they administer their own separate test for mortgage brokers within their state. So it's a both-and thing in the case of mortgage brokering. For your certification drone thing, my guess is it's going to be mandated and overseen by the FAA.
Correct.
And so that's probably going to be federal. Exactly. And a little nuance to mine that makes it easier to upkeep, because I don't have to change it as much, is that my test is teaching study methods. It's not teaching the content. You have to study, if that makes sense to you.
Okay, yeah.
So I'm teaching how to pass this stupid hard test. And it's how to read the questions, how to understand the terms, how to know what they're asking, what they're not asking, how to spot a trick question, all that kind of stuff. So that's how I chose to approach it. And part of that it was so that I didn't have to change it as much when regulations change. Yeah. All that said, though, the changes I've had to make have had to do with some regulations, because even though I'm teaching study methods, I needed to provide illustrations and examples, and you've got to use the real life regulations to do that. So there are places where I've had to make those changes and adjust things. So you would probably have to think that through in terms of how you're going to market the test and how you're going to approach it, whether or not the test is going to be study methods or a test to teach the content. Mm-hmm. Are you actually going to teach the content of the test, or are you going to teach the study skills? Or are you going to do both? You could you could even potentially make two products out of it. One that's the content and one that's the study method skills, and then have an upsell of some sort, which is not a bad idea.
Yeah. With you being successful with being able to sell what you're selling online right now, if you've been thinking about other things that you might want to go through the testing and the learning process and get your either licensing or certification and do the same thing?
It's funny. My in-laws have suggested, why don't you go take the bar exam? Why don't you go take the real estate test? Why don't you just become a professional test taker and do courses for all these? I've thought about that, but I have so many things on my plate that I enjoy more and that I'm seeing success at. So I'm not really pursuing that, but I think it's a viable option. Part of the authenticity of what I've done with the SAFE exam, that's the name of the test, my SAFE exam course, is that, I did serve in that capacity for a time before I got out of the mortgage industry. Full disclosure, I'm no longer a mortgage broker for those who are listening, but I still have the course. And it's because the course is study methods that I'm able to actually still have some authenticity and legitimacy in that way. But, as long as it's updated, people don't seem to care. So if I were to go and do the bar exam and the realty exam and whatever else, but I never worked in those fields, I think it would be a harder sell. Mm-hmm. And I really have no interest in working in those fields. So for me, it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I was looking at other things, because when I was looking at other things that I could possibly do, and then, that'd be similar to what you did. I thought, okay, I don't necessarily want to be state specific, because then obviously your market is very small, your target market, as opposed to being able to do something on more of a national scale. Maybe things like financial advisors, things like that. Who knows? I haven't done a lot of looking at it yet, but the one that interests me the most, because it's something I want to do and I think I'd really enjoy it, is doing the drone certification, the UAS certification. So that's kind of the path I'm looking at.
Yeah, that one sounds like the best option to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's fairly new. Number two, drones are all trendy and hip, technical stuff that people love. So it seems like you'd have kind of a fascination sort of a draw from it in that respect. And also, there's the possibility that this market's going to grow even more as drones become more and more mainstream. So it sounds to me like there's probably industries where using a drone to do some sort of inspection or certification or whatever. I mean, I imagine an oil rig off the coast, and they've got to visually inspect certain components that are up high. I mean, somebody's going to use a drone to do that eventually. And they're going to have to be certified, apparently. So I think the market's only going to expand. So it sounds like a great approach to me. So if I could give you some homework, some things to pursue, maybe we could do another recording in the future and you could give us an update on how things are going. Does that sound good? All right. I think first of all, you got to do some research on your market. We mentioned the Facebook groups, the keyword tool. There's another keyword tool. You can go to moz.com, M-O-Z.com. And they have a keyword tool that'll give you some free searches every day, like 2 or 3 or 4. I don't know how many it is. So you should be okay to use that a few times. You can use those to do some market research. I would get into those Facebook groups and start listening to the problems, the things that are there, and making a bullet point outline of what's there. And then I think the other kind of obvious thing that you need to do is to start studying and find out what it takes to pass the stupid test and go pass it. Then you'll have a really firsthand sense of knowledge of what it is that people have to go through. And you'll have the experience to know, should this be a content-based course or should this be a study skills course? And either way, I think you can make a pretty profitable course out of it. And then when we get back together next time, we can talk about channels where you can do your marketing, how you can approach that and things like that. And I can share what's worked for me and we could go from there. How's that sound?
Sounds great, Carey.
All right, man. I hope you found that conversation with my friend Gary helpful. As you can see, there is a whole lot that goes into determining a direction you're going to go with a business idea. There's the market research that you have to do because you don't want to create a product just because you think it's a good idea. You want to create a product or a service that fits a market need. And the reason you do that is because then you're guaranteed, if you do your marketing well, that you're going to have customers. You're going to not have wasted all that effort that you put into building the thing. So you heard me give Gary some ideas about how he could start doing that market research. It includes doing keyword research. It includes getting into groups on social media sites that enable you to hear the conversations that are going on around the area of need that you think there may be a situation. And also just for him to get his feet wet by getting into the process of getting certified in this way that he's thinking of helping people in the first place. Now, you also heard us talk about some of the things that go into consideration of an idea, like whether or not there's government regulation involved, whether or not there are overhead costs of different sorts. I mean, those are the kinds of things you need to kind of count the cost. You remember the passage where Jesus says, if you're going to become his disciples, you need to count the cost. In other words, you need to know what it's going to cost you before you make the decision. And that's a similar concept when you go into business. You got to count the cost. You need to not just go in naively. That's foolishness. You need to count the cost and understand what it might cost you to run this business. How easy is it going to be to run in light of the goals that you want to put in place for your business? How is it going to function? You see, Gary wanted to go perhaps and be in other countries for periods of time. He wanted to be able to give a significant portion of his income to these other causes. And in order to do that, he's got to have the right business model set up. So I'm hopeful that this coaching call was helpful to you. And I would love to have one of these with you if you think you have a great business idea or even are just like Gary and you have this desire of something to do to further the kingdom and you want to figure out a way to fund it yourself by building a business. I would love to have a brainstorming session with you, just like I did with Gary. So you can reach out to me, Carey at livebuildchange.com, and that's Carey at livebuildchange.com, and let me know a little bit about your situation. Tell me about yourself, and we might be able to schedule a time that we can chat right along the lines of what I did with Gary. Now, hopefully we will have a follow-up episode with Gary real soon once he's done some of his homework and comes back, and we'll get an update on what he's been doing. Now, if I could ask you to do one thing today, would you prayerfully, right now, think of one person who could benefit from this episode that you've heard of the Live, Build, Change podcast, and using the device that you're using right now to listen to this episode, swipe right, swipe left, swipe up, swipe down, whatever you have to do to find the sharing functionality, and you should be able to share this episode with a person via text or via email, and write your own little comment in with the share and tell them why you're sharing this particular episode with them. Because I'm convinced that as more and more of us Christians, more of us Christ followers who have a vision for advancing the kingdom of God, get ways established that we can fuel the causes that God has placed on our heart to fuel, we can see great changes happen in our world. And that's because we're living out our faith in an authentic way. We're building a business and we're changing the world. Thanks so much for listening. I know there's a lot of shows you could choose from, and I totally appreciate you being a part of the Live, Build, Change community. If you want to join the community on Facebook, go to livebuildchange.com/FB, as in Facebook. Thanks a lot. I will talk to you next time on Live, Build, Change.